Welcome everybody back to the Christian Vogue set. We're here today in the studio and we are celebrating Father's Day. This is going to be a great time together, and so we just want to welcome you and thank you for being with us. We've got our Christian Vogue team here today. We have our founders, Jackie Carpenter, and we have Rhiann Ring, who is actually on set with us, and our photographer. We have Anna Grace Beach, who is our editor-in-chief of Christian Teen Vogue, and we have some very special guests that Rhiann is going to introduce to you just to celebrate Father's Day. And we just want to say to all of our dads out there and all the families watching that this is just a great time to celebrate fathers, celebrate fatherhood and what they mean to all of us. And we just hope and pray that each of you have a wonderful Father's Day. So Rhiann, introduce our guests, and then he can tell us. He has a phenomenal testimony that you want to hear today.
Chaz,
Hi.
so glad you made it here. Okay, this is Chaz Parks. Okay, new, instant, and forever eternal friend for all of us. Chaz came knocking on my door one day. Yes, I answered the door to a solicitor. I'd actually seen him in my neighborhood. I moved into a new home, and I had been thinking in my head, I need to get a security system in here, and maybe I'll start checking into this. And almost instantly, when I started thinking this, I saw him a few doors down. He came knocking on the door that night and opened the door, and he's like, hey, do you have a security system? And I remember the opening line he had, but I knew that it was a trustworthy name with Brinks Home Security. And next thing I knew, I said, I don't want to go have to shop a zillion places. I know this is the one. But as we got to talking, it was like in the first 15-20 minutes of just giving me the spiel about everything about security, we spotted something there in my hall. I think we were talking about Corey Ten Boom, who everybody knows I love, and found out he had gone to Amsterdam with his family or someplace close. Yeah, he actually gone to Harlem.
Been to Amsterdam 3 times, twice with friends, once with my wife, and then we went to Harlem, which is 15 minutes west on the train.
Yep.
Amazing.
16 minutes.
Yep.
So, Chaz, thank you for coming, because once
me.
I started hearing about his testimony, I flipped. So what would have taken how many minutes?
I mean, so I just felt comfortable. Usually don't tell people when I'm selling them a security system my testimony, because they'd probably cancel on the spot. But yeah, we were together for a couple hours at least, right?
Yep.
I'm usually in the house for 45 minutes and gone, but it was maybe 3 hours.
Yeah.
We were just vibing.
Right,
It was good.
right. It was just a discussion about God's grace and mercy, and my background, his background, and he showed me some pictures and showed me a video of his being baptized and what God did, and I was just wow. And then of course he went on and on about his stunning, beautiful wife and his lovely little girl. And if you could see this man before and see after here, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I called Jackie, I said, we got to have him part of Christian Vogue. And she says, how about for the Father's Day issue? And I said, great idea. She's sitting off camera here, so we're all looking over there. So anyway, I called Chaz, and he had mentioned in our conversation he was interested in media to some degree. And I said, well, if you get involved in Hollywood, what would happen?
Yep.
I said, well, I know a lot of people in the Christian television industry, and amazingly, it just worked out. And so here he is. And of course, we will see where God takes this, but we wanted to invite him on here today to talk about before and after, what God can do, and touch some lives out there. I know there are some people out there that don't think there's any hope. Chaz, I got to hear about the background here.
Okay.
Now, Anna Grace, you start with a question or two if you
Well,
want to.
I want to know first, how did you meet your wife? I mean, she mentioned about your beautiful wife. How did you meet her?
Yeah, so I was baptized in 2014 at Passion City Church, and it was recorded, and I put it out there on social media and YouTube so I can send people a link, honestly, because it's so comprehensive to say, hey, this is all that happened. But anyway, she saw it through mutual friends and clicked on the link and slid in the DM, and then the rest is really history. We were friends for about 6 months, and then after really kind of seeing her personality and how she interacted with people, and most importantly, her love for Jesus, that's when I felt comfortable asking her to be my girlfriend, and we courted, moved on into marriage. So 2018 we got married and been together ever since.
Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful story.
Yeah.
And with Father's Day coming up, I mean, how do you feel? I mean, you have a baby girl now. I know it has to be really special for you.
Yeah, we had Calla Moselle November 13th of 2021. I'm gonna nail it, babe. I got it. So we had her last year, bought a house all within the same week. But it's honestly like having my first child at 40 years old. It still really hasn't all the way fully even set in.
Can you believe he's 40?
Yeah.
I was about to say you're 41.
It's the skincare.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's like it's so much joy. I mean, like it's incredible. Like I really can't explain it. You know, like just the happiness that she brings to myself and my wife. It's a huge blessing after all I've been through, and then the Lord just drops this blessing into her life. It's amazing.
And for her, I mean, you know, you see this day and age, the way parents are raising their kids.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Like, what are your hopes for her future and in this day and time that we live in?
I mean, a part of me wants to shelter her away from everything I possibly can. It's just, you know, hard to do that, I guess, this day and age with,
Right.
you know, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all these different outlets for social media.
Yeah.
There's a lot of negative influences that are
Right.
constantly feeding you on the feed, and you know, my hope for her is that we can raise her up in a household that she's not isolated or just naive to what is going on, but she can make the decisions for herself and understand there's a world out there that's evil, you know, but she has the opportunity, if the Lord has called her or elected her to be saved by His grace, that she can make those decisions on her own and go down the straight and narrow path and not the wide path of destruction that I chose.
Okay, let's interject here before
Okay.
we go on any more questions and get to this one. We need a recapitulation of your testimony,
Yes.
Okay.
which is powerful, many years.
Yeah.
This is what blew my mind, because if you saw him standing there at the door, and I felt completely comfortable talking to this man, and of course he's showing all these pictures of this beautiful family, I thought, oh, cool. And then we got into about our walk with God, and he showed me before. I was stunned, and then I saw his baptism video, and it was just very touching. You know, I love raw, real stories of before and after. But you started off with the walk with God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was a believer since when?
Yeah, well, you know, I grew up in the Baptist church in North Georgia, Dawsonville, Georgia, and my mom was really responsible for keeping me in the church. So, you know, I did kind of like the typical, you know, walk down the Baptist church aisle, and, you know, I raised my hand and, you know, and accepted Jesus into my heart, you know, and then got baptized there shortly after for the first time at 7 years old. And just it's one of those things where it was really on shaky ground, honestly. I mean, I knew who Jesus was. I believed that Jesus died on the cross, but I just lived like hell, you know, for most of my life, you know, until I got a little bit older. So
What was it that, just for other parents and people going through something right now, what was it that kind of set the stage for this?
the stage for me to live in that life, or
Living that life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, I think it comes down to the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in a household with a mom and dad, but they were kind of like two moving ships, you know, going through the ocean and just crossing paths. My dad slept in a separate room. You know, I never really saw them intimate kissing or anything like this. And there was the violence, not necessarily physical, but just a lot of anger and rage. And that wears heavy on a kid who's being influenced at a young age. You know, so just seeing those interactions with my parents, and, you know, my mom trying to work so hard to provide for us, and my dad would have, you know, jobs here and there, but he dealt with a lot of stuff as well. And that's where it kind of anchors in, is that he was influenced generationally, and there was people before him, his father and father's father, and so on and so forth, to where it just affected me as I got on into my teenage years and went through adolescence and everything. And I started acting out. I started kind of doing what I was learning, you know, acting out with anger and violence, you know, I guess, and just, yeah, so it affected me greatly seeing those things firsthand, which kind of sets me off into the path going into the teenage years. If you want me to go on forward, I can, but like,
Right.
that's where I was affected just from the parents. But keeping me plugged into the church was important because I kept getting the seeds of hope, you know, and the pastors and the community, you know, the youth groups, you know, Vacation Bible School, just hearing Jesus, hearing Jesus, hearing Jesus. He was always here. He was always here knocking, no matter how far I got away. And it was just really up to me if I was going to open the door.
He was
or
pursuing
not.
you.
Yeah, he was pursuing. I just wasn't listening all the way.
And so you mentioned, just for the sake of time, I don't want to skip this part, but you had mentioned to me when I met you, you talked about quite a battle with drug addiction, and it got you into some pretty big trouble.
Yeah.
Tell us how that started and where it went, and
Okay.
how you kind of wrapped, your brain around what was happening, and then got out of this.
Yeah, so maybe like going towards my 20s and the teenage years, all of these things that were happening. Another thing that's really, I guess, a big part of the story is that I knew my dad was an alcoholic, but he would hide it. I just remember bits and pieces of where I might catch him, drinking a beer, trying to hide it, outside or something like that. But he was just always disconnected, and there was just that laying in the background, and I just knew something was going on.
In the shadow.
In the shadow, for sure. And it just had got so bad at the house. I lived with my mom and dad. My sister was 2 or 3 years older than I was, and I have 3 older brothers. They're, almost 60 now. I mean, I'm 41, so it's like 2 different generations, right?
Wow.
So the reason why I said my dad was affected is they grew up in a different household, than we did. Like, they weren't living with us. I had like a brother maybe stay with us here and there, but just seeing those influences really started to impact me to where I wanted to act out, and got involved with the wrong groups and got into some gang-related activity and trying to act out and get attention where I may have not got attention from. And now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't really get a lot of attention from my dad, so maybe I was trying to get the attention elsewhere. And this attention would come from, going to party, going to hang out with girls, womanizing, doing drugs. So just simple entry gate drugs like smoking harmless marijuana, what everyone says. It's just, smoking a little bit of reefer, but it opened up the door to some pretty terrible things, like huffing gas, huffing Freon, snorting cocaine, doing methamphetamine, popping Xanaxes, like every single drug you could possibly name. And then also with the alcohol combined, like that doesn't help an angry person. So it just caused me to start acting out more and more and more, to where I did get involved in criminal activity and, a lot of thefts and just high-speed chases, and there's so much more to that story.
It was for the thrill too, right? I mean, part of it was for the thrill. And we know that sometimes when you get involved in this activity, I say activity like I'm so separated from it. I have my background too. We do this for affirmation, confirmation. We do it for a feeling of trying to find our way and navigate our way through finding our identity. And we get that a lot from our peers. And of course, when you're accepted and challenged, it's kind of fun when you step up and then you get this, hey, check it out, try something else. And we hear this a lot, and we think that sounds kind of cheesy, but it is exactly what happens. And so the more that we give ourselves rope to be around those, and if you didn't have the supervision from parents, I imagine in the home there wasn't a lot at the time of getting into your business, was there? I mean, were they looking over your shoulder at all to know what was happening?
I mean, it was to the point of where that my mom and I actually made a decision, I think around my freshman year of high school, that we were looking at different places for me to actually move into like a Christian boys home. And we decided upon Eagle Ranch up in North Georgia. It was a Christian boys home at the time. And then it turned into, they would have girls there as well, separate homes, but they have a boys' home and girls' homes, right? But it was this big ranch that we'd go out and have this really stable Christian living environment. Like a couple with maybe their kids would be the house parents. You would have a assistant house parent that would come in, to give them a break or whatnot. But I really started to see just like structure, discipline. Like you had things like chores, do your Bible studies, your cubicle to do your homework, and then just the fellowship with friends that are Christian-based, chapels. And so I started to see different things, but I was just so off the chain. At the time, I lasted less than a year, and I got kicked out, actually. So I had to go back to...
There is hope, people.
Right? I mean, I had to go back to my house where I was living. And at that time, my dad was essentially homeless and living in his car, and I was back home with my mom and sister, and they ended up getting a divorce. And she had breast cancer, which is really traumatic for me to go through and everything. And I think the hardest thing for me was 16 years old. I was going into my 17th birthday. She ended up passing away of cancer in like December of 1997. So that was really where the spirals really started to go down.
It sounds too like there was it was a crisis and chaos. And years ago I wrote an article called Crisis Seekers. And once you grow up in an atmosphere of chaos, it's very hard to break that generational thing you mentioned, which is
So
very
true.
scriptural. To actually sit quiet, you might hear a voice from the Lord. The Lord can speak to anyone, saved or unsaved. He can speak.
Yeah.
He used Balaam's donkey to talk. So he can talk to anyone and he could say anything. So we know that sometimes when it gets quiet, that's when we have to deal with things.
Yeah.
That's when we have to deal and face the music and the difficulty of it. Okay, so moving forward,
Yeah.
you got into this and then you ended up getting into enough trouble too.
Right. Get some quiet time.
How much quiet time?
So, like, to make a long story short, I mean, I was locked up approximately 35 times. I was in and out of detention center, boot camps, diversion centers. Went to prison 3 times, actually, hardcore prison.
My goodness.
So for around a total of 10 years, I was locked up. And the longest stretch I did was about 3.5 years. So there is quietness inside of these incarcerations, just in jail and prison in general, but there's constant chaos and noise in the background. There's people in there that were death row inmates, 25 to life sentences +3, +15. But I did find that the place where I could get alone with Jesus and just try to focus and eliminate those distractions. It definitely was a tough life, going through that for around 10 years. It's easy to say 10 years right now. It seems faster than it was once you're through the situation, those struggles in lives. But it definitely impacted me big time, and it took a lot for me to really get to a place of where I could just even live in the free world, as we call it, because there's so much recidivism with people, continuing to break the law and thinking they need to keep on living this way, and it just comes down to where are you associating with, who are you, building your circles with, and that's where I was able to come out of it. Is that I finally, after all of this, plugged into a church, and because I kept hearing Jesus calling me back, and I also, selfishly, I wanted community. I wanted good community. I wanted to have friends in life that would carry my casket one day. I could carry theirs. So
Yes.
I want some people to show up to carry me, but anyway, plugged into a church, and God just started to really develop these friendships and elevated me up and started restoring me and bringing me to the place